Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Scarlett and I am an atheist and skeptic in progress. I like to contemplate matters of life and philosophy, especially what gives us meaning and purpose. I was poking around looking for some new questions for atheists, and I stumbled onto a CARM page with about a bazillion questions for atheists that are seriously amazing in their obnoxiousness. But as I followed links, I came across this dialogue between a Christian and an atheist that is just like chef's kiss in its ridiculousness. If you're not familiar with CARM, Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, it's run by Matt Slick, who is a presuppositionalist Christian famous for the tag argument, the transcendental argument for God, which basically states that God explains the laws of logic and atheism doesn't, so God must exist. You might have seen Matt Slick in a debate, and there are certainly refutations of his argument out there, so we're not here about any of that. But I think it is important to establish that he is a presuppositionalist, and that means he starts with God. It's not that he has any evidence. It is that because he accepts God, he can attribute whatever he wants to God. This fact will be crucial to understanding the blog we're about to read today. And it looks like Slick has a call-in radio show, so you can call him if you have any questions. And he has books, too. This is a whole industry with these kinds of people. Wait. Atheist Island dystopia? Huh. Well, alright, with all that set up, away we go. So the specific post I came across is from a while ago called Presuppositional Apologetics, and it's dated June 9th, 2007. But it's still up, so we can assume Slick still thinks it's fine. The dialogue comes after a preamble, so let's see Slick's setup before exploring the dialogue. So right from the get-go, we have the presuppositions, an assumption that is taken for granted, and a Christian presuppositionalist presupposes God's existence and argues from that perspective to show the validity of Christian theism. This position also presupposes the truth of the Christian scriptures and relies on the validity and power of the gospel to change lives. So we see the presup stance right from the outset. God exists, Christian scriptures are valid, and the gospel has the power to change lives. Now, it is true we presuppose many things in our lives. That the world exists, for example. That other people are self-aware, like we are, and a whole list of things. What we presuppose will vary from person to person. Presuppositions are an important thing to take into consideration from a philosophical point of view when we are trying to establish what reality is. Ideally, we want to be able to presuppose few items and try to establish through some kind of evidence what is real. Okay, enough about that. Let's get to what Slick and other presups think about non-believers. From the scriptures, we see that the unbeliever is sinful in his mind and unable to understand spiritual things. Wow! The second paragraph further cements this. This means that no matter how convincing the evidence or good the logic, an unbeliever cannot come to the faith because his fallen nature will distort how he perceives the truth. The only thing that can ultimately change him is regeneration. To this end, the presuppositionalist seeks to change a person's presuppositions to be in conformity with biblical revelation. This is a hell of a take, and I am not sure that a dialogue can be fruitful between a presup and a non-believer. This basically says that a presup presumes that a non-believer has nothing of worth to offer in this discussion. And I repeat, this has not been established in any way. This is presupposed by Slick, and for him, the only remedy is conversion. Paragraph 3, things fall into place. Nevertheless, when using presuppositional apologetics, things fall into place rather nicely. You could consider presuppositional apologetics to be a kind of theory that you assume in order to explain the world around us. If you presuppose God's existence, then the world makes sense. You could then explain how we came to be, how there can be absolute laws of morality, and why rationality is what it is. Christian presuppositionalism deals with these issues, and others, very effectively. Well, sure, if I presume some all-powerful, all-loving deity is organizing the world in my life, I can explain everything by invoking that. But just because you say, this is God's plan, or this happened because God wants things this way, that doesn't make it true. If we continue living, our life will start to take some kind of shape, and we can give meaning to it. We learn lessons. We experience hardship. And humans are pattern-seeking animals, so it is really, really easy to say everything happens for a reason, man, even if we can't establish that. We can create the meaning that gives us a reason for why things happen the way they did, why the world is organized the way it is. Anyway, back to Slick. We're almost to the part where the dialogue starts. So he says he likes to see other people's presuppositions so that he can better talk about Christianity. I don't dispute this fact. I think it is a good idea to see where people are coming from. But he then conjectures that the following dialogue is a realistic example of how this works. Like I said, I think it is a good idea to know where people's presuppositions are, but I noticed that he wants to talk about Christianity in these dialogues, so this isn't really about understanding the world. It really is about proselytizing, and we are going to laugh out loud at how realistic this dialogue is. All right, that's enough of a setup. Let's go see this great dialogue. So Alan starts, I am an atheist, an evolutionist. Prove to me there is a God. Oh my God, cue the Steve Buscemi hello fellow kids .gif. Does anyone start a dialogue like this? I mean, I know Slick runs a radio program where people likely identify themselves when they call in, but this just doesn't happen in real life. I have been a part of groups with no attachment to atheism or religion, and I've seen atheists identify themselves. After someone expresses some spiritual belief, they offhandedly say, "Oh, I'm an atheist. I don't believe that." And the conversation goes on. This beginning is just like, what? So Paul replies, I do not think I can do that because of your presuppositions. I guess so realistic. Alan, why not? Paul, because your presuppositions will not allow you to examine without bias the evidence that I present to you for God's existence. Alan, that is because there is no evidence for God's existence. Paul, see, there you go. You just confirmed what I was stating. Alan, how so? By saying there's no evidence, Alan clearly means that he has not seen anything that he considers evidence, which neither have I. So Paul is just derailing the conversation. He could provide some evidence, but here's the magic trick. You say the only way you can provide evidence is by the other person converting. So voila, no need to provide evidence. So next up, Paul says, your presupposition is that there is no God. Therefore, no matter what I might present to you to show his existence, you must interpret it in a manner consistent with your presupposition, namely that there is no God. If I were to have a videotape of God coming down from heaven, you'd say it was a special effect. If I had 1,000 eyewitnesses saying they saw him, you'd say it was mass hysteria. If I had Old Testament prophecies fulfilled in the New Testament, you'd say they were forged, dated incorrectly, or not real prophecies. So I cannot prove anything to you, since your presupposition won't allow it. It is limited. Alan, it is not limited. What? Alan, it is not limited. What, is Alan a robot? Look, I understand that what he's trying to do here is say that there's lots of proof that atheists have already rejected. But note the if I had tense. There is no videotape from heaven. It's easy to say you have witnesses. You can write it in a book. But how do we know that there were witnesses? You just don't know them. They go to another high school. And you can say that prophecy has been fulfilled. But people have looked into those claims. And the prophecies are not all that impressive when you do. It's only impressive if you stand back from a far distance and say, ooh, look at all this evidence. But really, there's not a lot there. And I think that this is why we presuppose. We have these presups. They presuppose, and therefore they bypass all this need for evidence. It'll look good when you believe. So after Alan says, it is not limited, Paul says, yes, it is. Your presupposition cannot allow you to rightly determine God's existence from evidence, providing that there were factual proofs of his existence. Don't you see? If I did have incontrovertible proof, your presupposition would force you to interpret the facts consistently with your presupposition, and you would not be able to see the proof. Just by insisting if I did have incontrovertible proof means he doesn't. So right there, he doesn't have good evidence, and I think that this is the problem. They know it, But what they're telling themselves is it makes sense once you believe. So if you don't accept it, that's because Satan or something is blocking you from seeing. Your presuppositions won't allow you to see what is so obvious and true and good. And so it gives them an out for all this evidence stuff that people are asking for. And, nice gig if you can get it. So the dialogue ends with Alan, I see your point, but I am open to being persuaded if you can. Paul, then I must ask you, what kind of evidence would you accept that would prove God's existence? I must see what your presuppositions are and work either with them or against them. Yes, so realistic. That doesn't sound robotic at all. It doesn't sound forced or anything. But all in all, this would be a frustrating exchange. But this is what precepts have to offer. You have to accept God, the Bible, etc., the whole shebang before evidence can be produced. All right, let's look at this. To wrap up this post, Slick says that this approach is about changing people's perceptions, which, yep. And then he's got a couple of references, and especially theism is the belief that God exists and is involved in the world. So there you go. There's Matt Slick and his presuppositionalist approach to apologetics. Presupposition, to me, is not a great way to go about building your epistemology. I mean, there are some things that it makes sense to presuppose, like that we actually exist, that the world exists, that other people are like us. Descartes does this with his cogito, building out what he can establish has existence. And Descartes does somehow arrive at God, but I digress. But to start with the presumption that God exists, that the Bible is true, sets you up to accept anything that confirms those things as true or likely true. Of course, eyewitnesses in the Bible are convincing to you. Of course, fulfilled prophecy rings true to you. While the wording of Slick's realistic conversation is robotic and unconvincing, the effect of the dialogue does seem true to me. This is a frustrating way to have a discussion about theism and atheism. Each side has a different objective. The atheist is ostensibly looking for evidence for reasons the other person believes in God and potentially wants to evaluate those pieces of information. The theist presup wants the atheist to change the whole starting point. The presup's reason and evidence can only make sense to someone who has accepted those things. To me, this defeats the purpose of having a conversation. It's setting up a stupid gotcha, and it's not interesting philosophically. If the answer to why do you believe what you do is just, I just do, there's not a lot to explore, and we're not going to have a good time. By the way, those questions for atheists, which are debate requirements, are obnoxious and tedious, almost as if discouraging anyone from attempting to debate Slick in the first place. But really, there is no debate to be had here. This discussion is about submitting to a point of view. I'm not all that interested in engaging with these people, but it is good for us to all be aware that these types of Christians are out there, so that when we enter into a debate with one, we'll understand how they're seeing us and how they're seeing the world. Well, I hope you did enjoy this dialogue between a Christian and an atheist. I thought it was quite ridiculous, and I got a few laughs out of the robotic nature of it. As always, I've been Scarlett, giving my life meaning and purpose by making this video. If you liked it, you can know YouTube like it and all that stuff. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.